Well, thanks, Brooke, for joining us. We have Brooke Larimore from the Oklahoma Religious Trauma Network, founder of that organization, with us today. And just thought I'd just jump right in, Brooke, and give you a chance to just briefly introduce yourself and say a little bit about your organization. Anything else you want us to know?
Yeah, thank you for having me. So I am a licensed professional counselor, LPC. Um, I work primarily with folks that have experienced religious trauma, spiritual abuse, church hurt, all of those things. Um, and about a year ago, I launched the Oklahoma Religious Trauma Network, which initially was just a website. Um, After working in group therapy with a lot of folks regarding these issues, I realized they didn't even know like what safe spaces were out there because around here you don't even always know what therapists are safe. Um, and so they were like, we don't know where to turn. We don't, if we don't go to church anymore, we feel like we have no community. We don't know who can help. And so they inspired me to create the website and to kind of compile resources for healing in Oklahoma. And so after that, I started networking with other therapists around here that work with these issues. And then I started networking with churches that are actively working to help people heal from religious harm. And it's kind of just continued to grow into a community. We've started being more involved with events like Pride. We're starting to do more like community volunteer days. And so it's really developing into something cool. And I'm just grateful to be a part of it. So
Thank you.
yeah.
So, religious trauma is becoming a term that we hear more about, but I thought it'd be helpful maybe to start out and just ask, when we talk about religious trauma, what do we mean? Maybe how would you explain it to someone hearing the term for the first time?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of definitions out there. But the one that I like to go back to is the one from the Religious Trauma Institute. And so I'm going to read the definition first, just because I will butcher it. The physical, emotional, or psychological response to religious beliefs, practices, or structures that is experienced by an individual as overwhelming or disruptive and has lasting adverse effects on a person's physical, mental, social, emotional, or spiritual well being. So, notice that it says experienced by an individual as overwhelming or disruptive and has lasting adverse effects. So, religious trauma can be subjective. So really it's anything for a specific person, something from a religious system, a religious leader, something involved in that caused you harm and long-term negative effects. That's like the simplest way I can put it. But it's very nuanced because what might be traumatic to you may not be to me, and vice versa.
Thank you for that. I think that helps give us a good starting place. So, what are some common ways that you've seen religious trauma show up in people's lives, either emotionally or spiritually or maybe even physically?
Goodness, so many things. One of the biggest ones would probably be like after effects of purity culture. So, for those of you that may not know what I'm talking about, big movement in the 90s, big push by churches and government. There's a lot of government involvement in that to push for abstinence only education, push for kids to not be having sex and to scare them out of it, scare tactics, all of those things. I went to a very large public school here in the metro, and we even had a church come in and teach our sex education when I was in middle school. So you can imagine what that was like, very fear based. Um, there's a big emphasis on purity, a big emphasis really on purity with females and them being, in charge of other people's lust and sexual urges. And so that can lead to a lot of shame surrounding sexuality. It can also lead to a lot of sexual dysfunction. So that could be low libido or erectile dysfunction. Vaginismus is a really big thing that we're seeing in females come up. So sexual dysfunction for sure. Um, Struggles with making decisions. That's a big one. When you're in a high control religious environment, you don't really have to make your own decisions. So the people that leave, or kids that grow up and go to college and they leave the faith system they were in, all of a sudden they're like, well, there's no one making decisions for me. What do I do? They were also not taught to trust their instincts or their intuition, most likely, or their gut feelings. In fact, they were probably taught to override those things, or those had to be attributed to the Holy Spirit, which I'm not saying it would never be, but there was never any emphasis on this is my intuition, my gut feeling. And so a lot of people are fully grown adults with families and careers, and they cannot make decisions for themselves to save their life. That's a big one. So yeah, along with kind of like the not trusting gut feelings, not trusting our instincts, it kind of also leads into this disconnect from like our body. Like I feel like a lot of times in church, like mind and body is very separate. We don't treat mental health or mental illness or anything the same that we would as physical illness. Most places, most people are going to be like, oh my gosh, your leg's falling off. You should go to the doctor. Oh, you're suicidal. Like you should just pray harder, like, and so there's just like this big disconnect. But we should really look at it as like we're a whole being. We're a mind, we're a body, we're a soul, we're all of the things. So a lot of people are very disconnected from their bodies. So that can really tie into the sexual dysfunction, the decision making, the not listening to self. We're also kind of seeing an increased connection to disordered eating, which is fascinating. But it's along that same vein. Decreased self-worth, low self-esteem, because we're taught that self is inherently bad. We are bad. Flesh is bad. So a lot of people don't think much of themselves, or they're like, I didn't know that I could view myself as someone who's worthy just because I exist. Like that is like mind blowing to so many people. So that's a big one. What else? Emotions. So same thing, like self is inherently bad. My heart is deceitful. Can't trust my feelings. Feelings are not facts, those kind of things. And so people also aren't great at recognizing their emotions or expressing them because they've had to suppress them for so long. So sometimes the emotional intelligence is something that really has to be worked on. A lot of anxiety, we see a lot of depression. This list may be way longer than what you were asking, but I have a lot of things.
Go for it.
Okay. Lack of critical thinking skills. So again, you're taught you're not supposed to question, especially the authority as children. But even as adults, a lot of times there's authority, in a lot of like culture, like religious cultures, like women are, lesser than to men. So we all have this authority that we answer to outside of just God or higher power. So yeah, there's a lot of like, I don't know how to critically think about anything because I never had to. And I wasn't really even allowed to because I was very limited in the information that I was given access to. We see PTSD, we see CPTSD, which is a newer term. Are you familiar with that? Little.
Uh, I think so, but say more. Not everybody might be.
Yeah, so PTSD is more well known. You think about that a lot when you think about veterans that have been in active combat, things like that. We think of it as more like one big event, natural disasters even. But CPTSD is something that people are starting to do more research and talking about. It's not actually in the DSM, which is like our psychology Bible, if you will. It's not in the DSM yet, but it is basically complex PTSD. So it can be not just one isolated event. It can be a lot of quote unquote little t traumas over time. Not to lessen any of those traumas, but it's not always as obvious when it's happening until you look back and you're like, wow, all of these things have compounded. And so I feel like a lot of the time that's more of what I'm looking at with people that I'm working with. Sometimes there are like big T PTSD traumas because obviously there's, sexual abuse and Sometimes there's physical abuse, things like that. And so sometimes it is that, but a lot of times it's people don't have the verbiage for it because it's not such a big, obvious event like someone who was literally witnessing a war in another country. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that's a big thing. And so then there's often a lot of like, when people experience trauma, there's a lot of hypervigilance, like always on edge, always like afraid of something happening or afraid that they're doing something wrong. Or some people, it's like afraid of literally the rapture happening and them getting left behind. Like we just had this whole thing happen. What was that last week? People talking about that. But for people that grew up in more like charismatic, like high control Christian environments, like that was like a very real fear for them as a child. I didn't experience that as much because I grew up like Southern Baptist, so it wasn't as charismatic. And so we didn't talk about the rapture a whole lot, but like people that grew up in certain Pentecostal or Assembly of God, kind of settings, like they were like, if I ever woke up and my parents had left and gone to the grocery store, I thought that I was like left behind in the rapture. Like, and so there's just this hypervigilance, this I'm always on edge, I'm always in fight or flight, which you can imagine really weighs on someone physically. Like, and so that can lead into physical health conditions. And I could go on, but I feel like that's kind of a good, oh, another big one. This will be my last one. Isolation. So feeling very lonely, loss of community. So whether someone completely leaves religion altogether or they leave their particular church, and even if they go to a new one, a lot of times it's like, we love you, we're here for you, no matter what, until you're not in our group. And so then they leave and they're like, where the heck do I go? Where do I get support? Because in Oklahoma, it's like, or I would probably imagine the Bible Belt in general, it's like that's kind of how people find community here. If you move here, people say, what church do you go to? Not, are you a Christian or are you Muslim or are you, or are you religious? They just say, what church do you go to? So it's just kind of expected that that's where you find community. So I find a lot of people feeling really lonely and isolated. So there you go. That's kind of a baseline list, but there are so many things.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your list.
Yeah.
Uh, so why do you think it's important for churches and faith leaders to acknowledge and address religious trauma rather than just ignore it or try to, you know, explain it away or justify it?
Yeah. Well, I will say it has been really healing for me to connect with religious leaders like you and so many others in the metro that are working to help people heal and not sweeping it under the rug, like you said, because not everyone is moving into atheism. I would actually venture to say more people are moving into agnostic territory. Like they're like, yeah, like there's probably something, but like we don't really know, or I'm not ready to put a label on it or to completely walk away from it. And so I think that a lot of people are still seeking religious community and seeking something greater than themselves, a higher power, a spiritual connection. And so I think it's important for there to be spaces for that. Because like I said, we're not, mind, body, and soul. We're not just a body. Like there's so much to us. And I think it's important for people to have a connection to that if they want to, even if it's mindfulness or, you know, meditation or I don't know. I feel like there's so many different ways, but I know that there are a lot of people that are working through this that are like, I still want that in my life. I just can't go back to something that was so harmful. So I think it's incredibly important. I also think it's important for the systems that did the hurting to try to do some healing, right? Like, not in the sense of like, I'm going to make you sick so I can give you the cure. Because a lot of times it's like you're trying to make up for something that someone else did, right? But it's like if we're just avoiding that, it's like the cycles are just going to continue. Um, yeah, and I think some people in their healing cannot fully get there without having some sort of reconciliation with that. I think some people don't need that because they're like, I have no desire for that. But some people are like, I just need to know that they're not all bad. I need someone in that's a member of the clergy or whatever to say, I'm sorry that happened to you. That shouldn't have happened to you, you know, because those are likely things that they're never going to hear from the people that actually did harm them. Um, so I think some people need that for their healing.
Hmm. Good. Thank you. So, what practical, advice for our congregation would you have uh, in answering what steps can communities of faith take in order to become safer, more healing spaces for those who have experienced church hurt or religious trauma?
Yeah, great question. Um, I know that you are, so I'll just start with this. I think being very mental health positive, being very pro therapy and mental health treatment. There are a lot of churches that are not, and that's very harmful for people, right? So I think being open to, again, I'm not just a body and I'm not just a spirit. I have a mind and I have emotions and all of the things. So I think like being willing to talk about those things from the pulpit and maybe in small groups. And if someone needs like having the resources, like I know you like to have resources of therapists and places to refer people to. Because I also think a lot of times pastors end up being kind of therapists in a way and not intentionally, but they're like, I want to support you. But then it's like putting you in a position that's like, I don't like I have these tools, but I don't also have all of these tools. And so it's like I think it's really good to work together on that. Um, so being pro like, you know, mental health and not being scared to talk about it. I think also not being scared to talk about polarizing things. I think a lot of churches like to avoid talking about those things. Um, so I think especially like you said, it's unprecedented times. There's a lot of things going on right now, and I think it would be weird if I went to a church and they never talked about anything that was going on outside of these walls. Like that just seems like we're living in la la land. So being willing to talk about the hard things, being willing to dialogue. I think another big one is like not just with the church leaders, but church members. When we have someone new that comes into the church or someone that's visiting or we're connecting with someone for the first time, let's really try not to assume what their church experience has looked like or assume what their religious trauma looks like. Because I told you it's very subjective. You know, it's going to look different person to person. And they might start telling you a story and you're thinking, oh my gosh, like that is like the worst religious trauma. And then they get to the next part of the story and then that's actually their trauma and it wasn't the first part. So I think it's like really being open and not assuming. Um, really avoiding toxic positivity. Like everything happens for a reason. And that's the end of that statement. Or, well, not all churches, you know, or like obviously not all churches, but it's statements like that that really minimize people's experience, especially when they're grieving. So, like, obviously, I know you probably support people a lot through grief, but I mean, religious trauma healing is grief. So, not, you know, not saying things like that, like, well, you'll connect with God again. I know you will. Like, just wait and see, or, you know, just like very, like, be positive, but not in like a toxic way, I guess. Spiritual bypassing is a term they use for that. Like, well, at least they're in a better place, or at least this, or at least that. And it's like, at least, yeah. So trying to avoid that, I think.
Oh, that's helpful.
Um, yeah, spiritual bypassing is a whole thing. I experienced that a lot in some of my phases of grief in my life. And it's like, while well intended, I know, not well received. um, it's kind of that thing like if someone is experiencing pregnancy loss and someone says, well, at least you can get pregnant again someday or something, you know, like things like that. Like, you know, that's just like a random example.
Oh, I've been there when things like that were said, and
Yes.
uh,
It's like,
hope I've not said them myself. I sure try. Sometimes, though, I think it's ingrained in our system.
It it is. I can think back to when I did that before I had really experienced any, you know, deep grief. And sometimes it does take having to experience that to get it. But I just try to mention that because I think that's just a very common thing in Christian circles. There's kind of those isms, those things that we say, and then you're like, why did I say that? I didn't even want to say that. It just came out. So
Right.
just being intentional about that. Um, welcoming, questioning, welcoming people, asking questions about your church and about the history and about the finances and all the things. Like, obviously, I know that you may not be comfortable answering XYZ, but not letting people ask questions like just automatically like makes them not feel safe. So I think that's another thing is like understanding that felt safety, so not actual safety, but what someone feels, and trust are things that take time to be earned, especially in an environment where someone has experienced harm in a similar environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So understanding that just because we're friendly and welcoming the first day someone comes in, it might take time for them to trust us. And that's okay because we don't have to blindly trust and follow people like maybe we were taught that we had to, right?
Right. For somebody that has been wounded by a faith community, or maybe more than one even, what words of hope or encouragement would you want them to hear today?
I would say healing isn't linear. So if you feel frustrated that, oh, I feel like I made so much progress and then I'm backsliding or whatever, it's not backsliding and it's not minimizing your progress. It's just the way that it goes. There are going to be things that come up over time. I feel like healing from spiritual abuse is like such a lifelong thing. I do think it gets easier over time, but there's going to still be moments that are hard. And so I think it's really important to find safe community, whether that's, and for a lot of you, it probably is a spiritual community, but even if it's not, people that align with your values, people that aren't going to give you that toxic positivity when you're hurting, and people that are going to actually show up for you. Because I think, healing is really difficult in isolation. We need community of some sort. So I think that's probably one of the most important things.
What gives you hope in this work that you're doing? Do you see signs of healing or resilience or hope?
All the time. If I didn't, I don't know if I could keep doing it because it's hard.
Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, just seeing people realize that they have worth for the first time, or um, seeing people gain a new like love for themselves through being a parent for the first time because maybe their parents didn't love them unconditionally because they let their religion kind of override some of those natural instincts, which happens a lot, unfortunately. Um, or just, being a container for someone to be like, wow, I've never actually said that out loud to someone before. And I never thought I'd find a place around here that I could. Um, yeah, I mean, just I think people are incredibly resilient. I just don't think we always give ourselves enough credit for it. But I see healing all the time, and it's sometimes microwaves, sometimes macro, but it's it gives me hope that even in a place where we are very inundated and I don't know if indoctrinated is the right word, but kind of um that people are learning to think for themselves and to redefine what spirituality looks like for them in an environment where it's really hard to grow that. And for me, that is like incredibly inspiring. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Is there anything I didn't ask you or any other information you want to share on this topic? Just general observations with anybody?
I would say like finding ways that you can get connected. So like definitely check out our OK Religious Trauma Network website. We're always adding things on there. We're also on social media, trying to do more things in the community. But you could also join. I know there is a new book club that just started through Second Story Books. It's called like I think it's like heretical reads or something. But it's for people that have religious trauma. Um, There's tons of Facebook groups you can get involved in. So just like seeking that community wherever you can, even if it's virtual. Because I think there's a lot of spaces and a lot more spaces that are evolving. So I would encourage you to look into that.
That's awesome. And if folks want to get connected with you, uh, do you have openings for therapy or within your organization for folks to participate?
Yeah. I have a few openings right now. And if for whatever reason I can't accommodate or I'm not the right fit, I have a whole other network of therapists that I refer to. But my private practice is Cozy Corner Counseling Collective. So separate from the Religious Trauma Network, but I help maintain both.
That's
Um,
great. What's
and
the
I could,
website? What's the website for the network?
it's okreligioustraumanetwork.com.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, I sure appreciate you taking the time.
of course. Thanks for having me.